welcome to Season 5, Episode 13 of the Sajin Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Teal, and today we're jumping into the captivating world of night photography. Whether you're capturing the bustling streets of Seoul or the serene landscapes of the Korean countryside under a starry night that you can't see because of the light pollution, night photography presents a myriad of challenges and opportunities for photographers of all levels. Now, let's start by exploring the allure of night photography. This is something that I have covered with my students in my class a couple of weeks ago, and they found it very interesting, but also uniquely challenging. Like, the darkness of light has this sort of transformative effect on our surroundings, especially here in Korea. And it has this sort of mysterious and enchanting light that sort of comes across the cities. It's during these nocturnal hours that the familiar scenes sort of take on a new life. And if you've been anywhere in Asia, you know that even the vibe of the city changes once the sun goes down. So with the interplay of light and shadow creating a new sense of drama and intrigue, it's often one of the more alluring factors of photography is to sort of capture these moments. Now, one of the fundamental techniques I've been trying to teach my students is mastering long exposures. Now, in low light conditions, your camera sensor, of course, it requires more light to create a properly exposed image. Now, this often means using slower shutter speeds, which can result in stunning, light trails, silky smooth water, and rich, vibrant colors. Here in Korea, this gives you an opportunity because many of the cities will have a water feature, like a river cutting through the heart of the city. So if you're in Seoul, you have the Han River. Here in Ulsan, we have the Taewa River. And you got the Nakdong River in Busan and all that kind of stuff. Some of the cities even border on the ocean, like, again, Ulsan does here. I was talking last week about Suldo. It has an amazing night view as well. So you have all of these aspects of night photography that you can use, but you need one sort of thing, and that is the time and expertise to get out there and properly capture it. Now, achieving those breathtaking shots in the dark isn't just about like long exposures that you normally see me kind of shoot. It's also about harnessing the available light sources to illuminate your subjects. Now, in urban environments like Seoul and Ulsan and Busan, you'll find a wealth of artificial light sources, and these are amazing. So you got the warm glow of the weird orange street lamps to the neon brilliance of the downtown districts, especially in Seoul. Now, experimenting with different angles and compositions, utilizing those light sources, you can make the most out of these crazy cityscapes and craft something that's really visually captivating. Now, the biggest challenge, especially to my students, that I really have been trying to hammer into them is one piece of gear that is essential for night photography. Can you guess what I'm getting at here? Yes, that is a sturdy tripod. Now, since you'll be using slower shutter speeds and capturing images in often low lights, you need something to steady your camera. And you cannot handhold this stuff, people. I know for many experienced photographers, this seems like a given, but over the last couple of weeks, I've been teaching numerous lessons on night photography and low light photography to my students at the Ulsan Support Center for Foreigners. I do classes every Saturday, and for the last couple of weeks, we've been focusing on nighttime and low light photography, as we just had Buddha's birthday a couple of weeks ago. So I've been sort of really pushing them to get a tripod because of the fact is that, the tripod, as you know, provides stability needed to ensure a sharp, crisp image and allowing you to really sort of capture the intricate details of the night with precision and clarity. You cannot handhold this stuff. And the problem is that often the tripod is seen as the last thing that you get. Like, people will buy the camera, they'll get a camera bag, they'll get maybe another lens and some other stuff, lens cleaning rags and stuff. And you'll say like, hey, you need a tripod. And sure, Your camera may go up to ISO 43 million and there's somewhat clarity in there, but really and truthfully, you need a tripod and you need a sturdy one, not something that you buy at Daiso and you sort of duct tape your camera to it, hoping it'll stay in place. I really 100% am like supporting KNF's tripods. I've got a couple of them now, and the price point is amazing. You've heard me talk about them before, but by and large, for the value and the cost of these tripods, you can't go wrong. Now, sure, you can spend close to $1,000 on a 7-foot carbon fiber Gitso, self-leveling thingamajiggy, but really, if you're struggling to sort of make ends meet as a teacher or something, you can order a KNF one and it will do the job quite well. You don't need to drop big money unless you're getting paid big money. At least that's my philosophy. Now, when it comes to camera settings, precision is sort of the key. I usually start by setting my camera in aperture priority, at least if there's enough light there that you're not maxing out the exposure. And what I mean by that is if you're kind of within the f8 to f11 and you're still under 30 seconds, I think you're in a good space. But as the night progresses, you're going to have to jump into the manual mode and sort of dick around with those settings, because manual mode will give you full control over your exposure settings. So you can adjust your aperture to control the depth of field, allowing you to sort of capture both sharp foreground details and dreamy out of focus backgrounds if that's what you want. And then you can adjust your shutter speed as well, the whole exposure triangle. But the last part I often tell people is don't play around with your ISO too much. And by that, I mean, when you're shooting at night, there's that tendency to sort of bump up the ISO, but you're going to end up having to do a lot of noise reduction here. So keep your ISO as low as you possibly can. So ISO 100. If you are struggling and you have to go into bulb mode and stuff like that, you really got to step back and ask yourself, is this the shot that you need? And I'll honestly say that in Korea, if you're shooting at night in the city, you're not going to need to really jack up your ISO. Most of the time, I'm shooting in aperture priority. And if I need to sort of jump into manual, it's never going to be for like a long exposure of minutes, unless I've got an ND filter on and then I'm not in the city. So sort of keep that in mind. I usually, for cityscape shots, have it in aperture priority, and it's fine. Also, I will say that I tend to tell my students, if they're shooting at night, shoot for the blue hour or late blue hour, nothing too much beyond that. If you're downtown Seoul, sure, the night has sort of this, different effect on the city, but you're also going to be fairly illuminated by artificial light. So again, like going into full manual, it's not really too much of a concern if you're starting out and you're just not really too sure of yourself and are fumbling with the dials and whatnot. So keep that in mind. Now, additionally, consider using a remote shutter release or the camera's built-in timer to maximize the stability and also minimize the camera shake when you're pressing the button. Now, the simple step can make a world of difference, especially when you're trying to achieve tack-sharp images, particularly with long exposure. And what I typically tend to do is I switch to my phone's app that connects to my Canon camera, and that allows me to trigger the camera remotely via my phone. If you don't want to do that, or if you're having trouble connecting, set a 2-second timer. And the cool thing about Canon cameras, and they've had this feature for decades now, if you're bracketing, if you're trying to shoot multiple exposures to do a HDR, shooting with the timer on will actually trigger the different shots for the exposure bracketing sequentially. So what I mean by that is that I usually do 5 shots, and you've got your bang on, two under, two over. And it sometimes kind of becomes a pain in the ass if you're just trying to trigger those manually. If you have the timer on, it'll shoot them one after another. Boom, 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 boom. So the multiple exposures, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, basically it's going to give you a wider range of tones and details in your images, especially in high contrast situations where the dynamic range sort of exceeds your camera's capability. Bracketing allows you to sort of blend all of those exposures together to create a HDR image with exceptional detail and tonal range. It's gotten a bad rap over the years because, and I'm going to really call myself out on this one, I did this too. Back in the day, like I'm talking 2005, maybe 2006 or around that era, yeah, we were creating some god awful images, like stuff that will make your eyes bleed rainbows. Now it's a lot better. Bracketing allows you to sort of bring in the elements. And this kind of came up with one of the questions in my class because the students were talking about, the signs on the cityscapes blowing out. And I said, well, yeah, if you bracket that, it's going to dial it back a little bit and you're going to get more of a balanced image. And it sounds scary, but with the technology that's in Lightroom and other, Photoshop and whatnot, it's now what used to be a separate program and a whole bunch of other nonsense. Now it's a couple of clicks and it's done. You just have to remember to bracket. And typically with most of the cameras these days, it's just a matter of going into the bracketing section, adjusting to how many stops of difference you want, and then setting that and then tripping the timer. Remember, night photography is as much about skill as it is about creativity. So don't be afraid to experiment with different compositions, perspectives, and lighting techniques to create these images, and embrace the darkness, not in your soul, but in the city, and let your imagination run wild. So this kind of wraps up today's episode. This was inspired by one of my classes, and I really thought it would be best to sort of share it with you guys as well. So I hope that you found this style of podcast interesting. And, if you're looking for more helpful techniques in mastering the art of night photography, shoot me a message. But until next time, keep exploring, keep experimenting, keep capturing the magic of the night, and don't be afraid to share those great images with me. Happy shooting. Embrace the darkness.